In August of 2021, fans of niche RPGs received an unexpected sign of life. It was at this time that Akifumi Kaneko and Matsuzo Machida of Wild Arms and Shadow Hearts fame respectively announced an unprecedented dual Kickstarter in order to fund spiritual successors to these two long dormant series in the form of Armed Fantasia and Pennyblood. Being a scholar of RPGs, promptly began screaming about it at home, at work, online, anywhere and everywhere, and to anyone who might listen, and many who couldn't care less. Of the two, one clearly stood above the other for me. Nothing against Wild Arms, but as a fan of horror and RPGs, the alchemical mixture that makes up the Shadow Hearts series, and thus Pennyblood, speaks to me in a way few other franchises can. I should note here that I've never actually played a Wild Arms or Shadow Hearts game, unless you count the maybe 20 minutes I spent with a friend's copy of Wild Arms 2 when I was like 12. There's a good reason for this, two actually. The first and foremost being, well, money. One thing you quickly learn when collecting classic games is that if a title is niche but beloved, you're gonna be paying an exorbitant price out of pocket if you're looking for a physical copy. In the case of Wild Arms, this is mitigated somewhat as a few of the titles have been made available digitally. Not all of them mind, but the first three at least are currently available at a reasonable price on the PlayStation Store. Shadow Hearts has not fared as well, with the trilogy yet to see a digital re-release, being stuck stranded on the PS2 with ever-inflating price tags. As for the second reason, that has to do with the fact that Pennyblood is not the first time Shadow Hearts has seen a spiritual successor. The first game, in fact, was itself a spiritual successor / sequel to the oft-overlooked Koudelka that released in 1999 in Japan and 2000 in the West for the original PlayStation. Of the games in the series, Koudelka is easily the most expensive, averaging around $250 USD, and is itself somewhat of an outlier, being only loosely connected to Shadow Hearts, which can be attributed to its being spearheaded not by Matsuzo Machida, who served as art director on the title, but by Hiroki Kikuta. In the 90s, Kikuta was working at Square as a composer, with his biggest claim to fame being a little game you might have heard of called Secret of Mana, as well as its at the time Japanese exclusive follow-up Trials of Mana. The guy had more than proven himself in the realm of music and wanted to try leading his own project. The corporate structure at Square at the time, however, made that next to impossible, so he left, founding his own company Saknoth in 1997. It was there that Kikuta's desire to craft a horror RPG took shape as he and his team began development on what would become Koudelka, with Kikuta serving as director, producer, writer, and composer. Koudelka was initially envisioned as a 4-part series following the titular character and her family over the course of the 20th century, with the first game taking place in 1898. However, upon release, the game saw middling success both commercially and critically. Kikuta would go on to leave Saknoth soon after, taking his original vision for the series with him. This left Machida take up the torch, and he would go on to use the opportunity and the foundation laid by Koudelka to craft something familiar and yet distinctly its own, and thus Shadow Hearts was born. I've alluded to my own history with the series, but to elaborate further, I actually managed to snag the first Shadow Hearts a number of years back for a reasonable price and was planning on playing it. But as I began looking more into the series, I learned of the existence of Koudelka. Knowing that Koudelka ties into Shadow Hearts, no matter how minor those ties may be, meant that I was reluctant to skip over it for fear of missing out on any lore or story beats. Given Koudelka's price tag, however, I was not going to be playing it anytime soon. And so Shadow Hearts languished for years, sitting on my shelf unplayed as Koudelka gradually grew into a white whale of sorts, a title I longed to have but could never quite justify picking up. That was until the Kickstarter. As you might have surmised, I am not immune to hype. With the announcement of a Shadow Hearts follow-up, my desire to dive into this world that I had so long admired from afar grew exponentially, and with it came a freeing of my inhibitions. A hype-driven high, if you will, that saw me excuse some purchases I might otherwise have thought twice or even thrice about. And thus, I come to you today, copy of Koudelka in hand, having finally decided to jump in and see what this little forgotten piece of gaming history has in store for me. Before I do, please allow me a moment to shill this channel. I love what I do here at llamelion Gaming, and if I'm being honest, it's a bit of a dream of mine to one day make this my full-time job. In order to do that, I require the assistance of all of you fine folks watching. So if you enjoy my work, please consider subscribing, sharing this video around, liking, commenting, all that good stuff. Every little bit helps and genuinely means more to me than I could possibly put into words. Now with that out of the way, let's get back to Koudelka. All who seek to embark on the journey held within Koudelka are first greeted by a somber, haunting melody accompanying a hooded figure guiding their horse across a lush and hilly Welsh countryside. Their destination is unknown, their reason for travel held close to their chest. All you have to go on is an imposing clifftop compound beside the sea, later revealed to be the Nemeton Monastery, and an unexpected determination on the hooded figure's part, a woman by the name of Koudelka Yasant. She scales the side of the monastery, losing her pendant along the way, and breaks in through a second-story window. As it so happens, the room she finds herself in is not unoccupied, as she spots a man slumped and bloodied against a wall. Where Koudelka is an outlier in dress and demeanor, this man, Edward Plunkett, is the picture of the classic adventurer, affecting confidence and charm even as he lies moments from death. Death awaits not only from whoever or whatever led him to his current predicament, but from Koudelka as well, as she hides a dagger behind her back, prepared to end his life with the slightest provocation. This proves unnecessary even as he pulls a gun, as rather than threatening her, he places a bullet into a beast as it approaches Koudelka from behind, before tossing the gun her way so that she may finish what he started. In these opening moments, Koudelka establishes its tone, setting, and two of its three principal characters in a way that few games manage in dozens of hours. Players can immediately peg Koudelka as quick-witted, always on edge, but willing to grant space for others to prove her wrong. Edward, meanwhile, is genuine, almost to a fault, having fully embodied his desire for adventure and willing to do whatever he must to keep himself and those around him alive. And Nemeton is a horrific place with a tortured and cruel history stretching back hundreds of years. While what you find here is a near perfect encapsulation of what you can expect from these characters and this world, it is still but a glimpse at the story that makes them who and what they are. As you progress, Koudelka, Edward, Nemeton, and later on in our third and final character, Bishop James O'Flaherty, as well as the handful of NPCs peppered throughout, are painted in ever-growing shades of grey, rendered with a subtlety that means that even as they act in ways that surprise in the moment, upon reflection, every action is almost painfully in character. If it seems like I'm avoiding specifics, that's because I am. Koudelka takes place over the course of one night, and the plot is relatively simple. Discover the secrets hidden in Nemeton's past and just who or what drew Koudelka there in the first place. That said, as you can tell from the intro, you're not immediately given much to go on. Rather, you discover character motivations and backstory as you naturally progress through the game. As such, the plot unfurls before you like an old and dusty tome, with each page turn deepening the world around you, and I would rather not rob you of the experience of seeing it unfold firsthand. I'm struggling to put into words why that's so important to me. Like, there aren't really any massive plot twists or dramatic character turns, but there's just such a beautiful simplicity to it all, and the way every character involved, even if they at first seem out of place or they're more for convenience, have their own histories and desires that brought them to Nemeton. Hell, Edward has the least overt reasoning for being there. He is quite literally just an adventurer, but they make that important to his arc. Koudelka calls him out for growing up in privilege and being able to go off on adventures while she's had to suffer time and time again and has come to Nemeton to ensure that such suffering does not happen to others. It's phenomenal, and all of it deserves to be seen in context. One thing I would like to discuss is the ending, or endings as it were. I won't be spoiling any details, but there are a few things to note. First off, there are 3 endings in total, a good, a bad, and a worst. The worst occurs if you fail to recover the pendant Koudelka dropped in the opening. I'll say right now, get the pendant. Near the start of Disc 3, you'll come across a fountain that acts as a save point. After progressing a bit further, you'll no longer be able to use it to save, but if you interact with it again, you'll recover the pendant. The worst ending is not one to gun for, it's more of a joke ending with how abrupt and unsatisfying it is. However, things get a little more complicated with the good and bad endings. You get the bad ending if you die against the final boss, and the good ending if you defeat it. What complicates things is, I personally find the bad ending to be more satisfying. It's difficult to delve into why without spoiling things, but I just found it to be truer to the characters involved, as well as its added length allowing for more closure. Also, if you plan on playing Shadow Hearts, I believe the bad ending is technically canon, so you'll want to check it out regardless before moving on. It's an odd sensation, loving something so much, but holding back on expressing why that is because I want to provide the opportunity for others to jump in and experience it in a similar way to how I did, that is, without really knowing anything beforehand. At the same time, I know that going full on analysis mode and spoiling it could make folks more inclined to check it out, as I give them a glimpse of just what makes Koudelka so special to me. All I can say is that I believe that this world and cast is more than worth the dozen or so hours it'll take to see the tale to its end. Oh, that PS1 aesthetic though. While I may be reluctant to expound on the story, I am more than happy to lavish praise on the presentation. The chunky polygons, blurry textures, gorgeous pre-rendered backgrounds. Yes, I am one of those little freaks who long for the days when the PS1 reigned supreme, where atmosphere came not from an overworked contractor slavishly adjusting the lighting on some inconsequential background object, but by not being able to tell what the hell I'm looking at. I say that with affection and zero sense of irony. I genuinely believe that the graphical presentation in Koudelka helps elevate its sense of foreboding and dread as you tread through the halls of Nemeton, while all manner of geists and monstrosities wait around every corner. The star here is definitely the creature designs. I wasn't kidding when I said there were times I didn't know what I was looking at, as these things range from masses of meat with misshapen eyes, to giant insects, to creatures that I honestly don't know how to even begin to describe. This is best seen in the bosses, which look as though Machida and his team conjured them from a sleep-deprived waking nightmare. Not every design is a winner. There are a fair number of simple ghosts, giant cockroaches, and possessed furniture. These fall away in the face of the more outlandish designs, and it's those that will stick with you, perhaps even going on to cause some lost sleep of your own. For the characters, something I found fascinating was how conservative most of the designs were, with many feeling accurate to the time period. Edward looks like he stepped right out of the 1800s American Southwest, while James is quite literally just wearing bishop robes. This changes with Koudelka, who instead donned something much more modern. Thigh-high stockings, a short skirt, and choker all ensure she wouldn't be out of place amongst a 90s goth or grunge crowd. But that's kind of the point. She's an outsider wherever she goes, cast out by her own people at a young age. She's had to make do for herself, never feeling like she truly belongs. While I won't give them so much credit as to say every detail was deliberate, a good deal of the basis for design was most likely just goth girls in miniskirts are hot, but I do believe that on some level the disparity in designs was intended to emphasize just how different her background is compared to the rest of the cast. Speaking of the cast, let's talk voices. The direction and writing veers into the theatrical at times, especially when it comes to Edward, who is written as though he is the star of his very own Shakespearean play, complete with dramatic one-liners and long speeches. His voice actor, Michael Bradbury, goes all in on this take, embracing the hamminess which gives Edward an effortless charm, but also a layer of naivete and even occasional menace.
For myself.
Quit lecturing me! I want no part of a lukewarm existence filled with regret. No. My way is to not worry about consequences, and to do whatever it is I want to do. Chance means nothing to me. Life's a gamble, and once you place your bet, you'd better play to win, or else you end up dead.
Edward?
Viviana Bateman as Koudelka, meanwhile, nails both her sardonic wit and latent vulnerability. As I've said previously, Koudelka has been through hell, and it's clear from every line delivery that she's put up this barrier between herself and others. In those rare instances where that barrier falls, Bateman is able to step up to the plate and embody the loneliness and empathy driving every action Koudelka takes.
Oh, there were so many of them. This is hell.
What? What's going on?
Oh, they were imprisoned and tortured and, thousands of them.
I also have to mention Robert Bacon, portrayed by Brian Kojak. He is as close as Koudelka comes to having a comic relief character. He's kind of divorced from proceedings, a third party more interested in what happens rather than actively getting involved. Kojak brings a manic, almost gesture-like energy to Bacon. He's screechy and melodramatic, and a delightful counterpoint to the more measured portrayals and proceedings around him.
As yourself.
I see. Well, I've been around for 600 years, and I've seen plenty of abnormal people just like myself.
My dear old man, might you be related to the great warlock Roger Bacon, who made such a name for himself in the 13th century?
You are very knowledgeable. I am that warlock, Roger Bacon, you speak of.
Then, the music. From the distressing and unearthly battle themes to mournful vocal back dirges, the soundtrack in Koudelka, despite numbering only a dozen or so tracks, so thoroughly wraps itself around you that it is impossible to divorce each song from the scenes they accompany. This is aided by how sparsely placed the tracks are. During exploration, the music fades out, leaving only the eerie and unsettling environmental ambiance. But as soon as a cutscene or battle kicks in, Kikuta's score grips you by the collar and forces you to pay attention. I'm trying to pick a favorite and utterly failing in the endeavor. Perhaps Requiem, the theme accompanying that first cutscene with goosebumps-inducing vocals, or maybe Incantation, the boss theme that's as likely to pump you up as it is to instill a sense of dread. In my experience playing video games, few are the soundtracks that I can say feel wholly unique in the space. Koudelka's is one of them, and I beseech all of you watching to go out and give it a listen. For now, though, allow me to treat you to the heartbreakingly devastating strings found within Dead. In spite of my excitement for Penny Blood and desire to jump into Shadow Hearts, I did have some hesitancy with regard to Koudelka, specifically in terms of its gameplay. This is because I quickly learned that it contains several mechanics and features that I don't typically find appealing. But let's set the stage first. As with most RPGs, Koudelka has two primary modes of play, battle and exploration. Battles are random, turn-based, and take place on a grid, with your team on one side and your opponents on the other. Speed, and thus turn order, is determined by a character's agility stat. A high enough agility can result in attacking multiple times before an opponent's turn goes off. Positioning on the grid is also important. As usual, you'll want to keep squishier characters in the back, but in addition to this, characters and enemies alike cannot progress past their opposition. So if Edward is in the middle of the grid, enemies cannot move past him unless he is pushed further back on the grid by one of their attacks. This allows your tankier characters to act as a wall. It's a system I came to really enjoy, especially in the way it steps into strategy RPG territory without shedding its standing as a traditional turn-based system. There are three core means of attack: magic, ranged, and melee, with each having a kind of limiter. Magic has MP, or magic points, ranged has bullets, and melee has durability. This was the first mechanic to give me pause. I cannot stand weapon durability. I have never found the mechanic fun or thought it positively impacted the game experience. It is at best a minor inconvenience, which luckily is the case here. This is because durability is most impactful in the early game when weapons are scarce, but it's possible to bypass the mechanic entirely until you build up your arsenal by way of smart use of magic and having your physical hitter run fisticuffs. There are fist weapons that also break, but for the first disc or so you can easily get away with punching things without a weapon equipped. This allows you to stock up on melee weapons and bullets so that when you do make the switch to harder hitting weapons, you won't feel the sting as badly when they break on you. There are around a half dozen weapon types ranging from swords to spears to rifles, 4 types of damage dealing spells, 3 defensive/healing spells, and a suite of fortifying spells that buff or debuff a given stat. As you use a specific weapon type or individual spell, it'll gain experience and gradually level up to a max of 3. Weapons gain the potential for an extra hit per level, while spells get stronger in addition to requiring more MP to cast. I didn't find any particular weapon type worse than any other. It mostly came down to what I wanted to specialize in / what I had available. Same goes for the offensive and defensive spells. The fortifying spells, however, I found pointless. There just wasn't ever a time I thought buffing / debuffing would be more useful than extra damage or healing. Weapons can also have special attributes, such as dealing a certain type of elemental damage, draining HP / MP, causing poison or stun, etc. Some of these were more useful than others. Draining HP / MP always felt inferior to outright damage, and light infused weapons oddly heal the majority of enemy types. This meant that most non-standard weapons quickly became discard fodder to clear out my inventory. Rounding out the equipment section, each character has 1 armor slot and 2 accessory slots. Accessories proved huge in my playthrough, granting some serious buffs to magic defense and MP pools, meaning my designated mage never once wanted for MP to cast spells. Armor, meanwhile, barely factored in at all, because I only managed to find 2 whole pieces of armor throughout my entire playthrough. I'm not sure if this was intended or just bad drop luck on my part, but it definitely felt odd and made me question what the point of including armor was in the first place. For direct character progression, this is where the second mechanic to give me pause showed up. As you battle, characters gain experience and level up, with each level netting them 4 ability points that can be placed into one of 8 stats: strength, vitality, dexterity, agility, intelligence, piety, mind, and luck. You're free to build each character however you wish, with little guidance outside of a description for each stat and a suggestion for which stats are best for melee fighters versus magic users. Freeform stat distribution tends to trip me up. I'm the kind of player who holds off on spending ability points until I have a better feel for the game. You can't do that here, as points have to be spent immediately, resulting in you making a game-long decision before you've had the chance to get your bearings. In this case, things worked out, levels come fast, ability points are plentiful, and the early going is easy enough that even when I felt I'd made a mistake, it wasn't hard to course correct. I ended up building Koudelka as my all-around magic user and healer, while Edward went melee and James served as range. I also routinely pumped points for all 3, in vitality to up HP and physical defense, agility for speed, and piety for MP and magic defense. While my worries proved unfounded, it was not without some trial and error, as I gradually learned the ins and outs of the system for myself. When it comes to exploration, Koudelka takes many cues from other PS1 era survival horror titles. This means that littered throughout the game are environmental puzzles and locks requiring key items. It's here where I imagine a lot of players will run into some issues. For starters, there's no overt indicator that an item can be interacted with, no telltale sheen or hard outline. I got around this by scouring every room, spamming the X button to check for interactables, but the fact that I felt the need to do so is a bit unfortunate. I looked out and was able to find everything necessary to progress, but there are a fair amount of items located in early sections of the game that don't get used until much later on. If you happen to miss one, you're in for a headache as you trek back through Nemeton looking for that random piece of colored glass you happen to miss. If you do find yourself in this position, I highly recommend looking up a walkthrough. The game is ostensibly linear with constant forward progression, so having to pause proceedings to go on a scavenger hunt fusses with the flow and is liable to negatively color your playthrough. One issue I did contend with in this regard is the limited inventory space. Space is shared across all items, whether that be weapons, accessories, key items, etc. This becomes an issue when you recall that some key items don't get used until much later in the game. This means that you have to either leave them behind and hope you'll remember where they are when you inevitably have to backtrack to pick them up, else you commit to lugging around a bunch of junk that only serves to eat up space for most of the runtime. I opted for the latter, with my solution being to routinely discard any accessories and weapons I didn't plan on using. I imagine they intended for players to not pick everything up or else counted on the weapon durability system to help clear up space as you go. Neither solution I particularly like, so all could have been resolved with a Resident Evil style item box that let you stash items away until they were needed. This has been the most negative section of the review by far, but while actually playing the game, the issues discussed here rarely impacted my overall enjoyment. I had such a great time with the battles and progression once I had a handle on them, leveling up a spell or weapon was always hype, and the rate at which character levels and ability points came in meant I constantly felt like I was getting stronger, which is one of the primary appeals of RPGs for me. While the concerns surrounding exploration could prove irritating, I can only speak to the experience I had, which by and large was a smooth one with only the occasional minor annoyance. Typically, I try to use my conclusions as a space to summarize my thoughts and provide as unbiased of a recommendation as I can. Just because I enjoyed something doesn't mean others will as well, and for a review, sometimes it's important to step back and attempt to evaluate art from a more populist perspective. I will not be doing that today. Everyone watching, play or watch Koudelka. Koudelka deserves to be hailed amongst the greats of the PS1, spoken in the same breath as Final Fantasy VII, Metal Gear Solid, Resident Evil 2, and Silent Hill. What Kikuta and his team at Saknoth accomplished here is a masterclass of atmosphere, art direction, score, and character writing. What flaws that do crop up are so thoroughly eclipsed by its strengths as to be non-existent. And so once more I say, play or watch Koudelka, talk about Koudelka, don't let it become just a bullet point in the history of the medium. Koudelka deserves so much better than it got. It has quickly become one of my all-time favorite games, and maybe it will for you as well. With that said, I would like to thank you all so much for watching and sticking around to the end. This has been one of the harder reviews I've had to write in a while. Finding the right balance between accurately describing my experience playing Koudelka while also communicating just how much I truly adore this game proved to be a taller task than I anticipated. Hopefully I managed it well enough. Regardless, please take care of yourselves, and next time I think I'll be getting into the holiday spirit a bit, but not too much. After all, it'll only almost be Christmas.